Good evening. Tuesday, 7 p.m. 7 p.m. kickoff for myself and Dan, which will become relevant as we get into this week's chat on broadcasting rights, which has been a hot topic this week. It's not usually the kind of sexiest topic in football to talk about broadcasting schedules and when a team is playing and why a team is playing at a particular time and day. But Mr. Jurgen Klopp has brought that into the spotlight this week. With his comments around Liverpool playing at 12:30 after playing Wednesday night in the Champions League, and the interview with Des Kelly certainly well worth a watch. And there's certainly even that interview doesn't necessarily clear up some of the ambiguity around so on. So we'll get into that today. But useful starting point, because actually there's a bit of a tension here, Dan, because you've got Klopp and Liverpool unhappy with playing at a 12:30, but Liverpool's biggest source of income is broadcast money. So how do clubs kind of think about broadcast money when they've got these kind of tensions going on?
Yeah, it's really compulsive viewing that Klopp interview. It's actually almost the interview that you want to watch, but you don't want to watch, and you're sort of half like looking away, because actually Kelly sort of fronts up and sort of confronts the points that Klopp makes, and we'll maybe talk about that in a bit of detail too. But depending on some of the larger European clubs and a number of the Premier League clubs included in that, Liverpool are making upwards of over £400 million revenue plus per season. I think it was coming up to almost 500, I think, in a way. Over the last, it was a great stat actually a couple of years ago, where when Liverpool won the Champions League, they were the first team in world football to break the £250 million mark in terms of broadcasting revenues. And that was obviously slightly different, which was just over £152 million, I believe, in terms of central Premier League broadcasting monies, and then just under £100 million in terms of winning the Champions League for that season against Spurs in the final. So you can simply see from a greater proportion of revenues, and obviously that doesn't include stadium, match day, sponsorship, and commercial parts. But over the years, we've seen that what usually, in slightly different terms, what usually is deemed the most lucrative game in world football is always that playoff Wembley final game, because everybody understands the broadcasting riches from getting into the Premier League and actually the parachute payments coming back down. And you can see by the amounts that Liverpool effectively earned from winning the Premier League last year, which was, they haven't actually, I don't think they've actually provided those figures.
No, they haven't this year. I suspect there's the COVID rebates and so on.
I think my brain was just starting to think over that, because usually at the end of every season they provide that. But depending on when those rebates, or broadcasting rebates, happen or otherwise, it was estimated that Liverpool or the champions were going to get in the region of 150 to 170 million pounds, which means that the relegated club, from its central broadcasting distributions, is still going to earn circa 95 to 100 million. So the short answer there is that, especially for the smaller clubs who have smaller commercial, sponsorship, gate and match day revenues, those central broadcasting funds, which encompass BT Sport, Sky and Amazon for the UK domestic market, and obviously all of the exclusive incumbent partner broadcasters around the world, it makes up a disproportionately large number that those teams are heavily reliant on. And that BT, one of those two packages, is obviously a very lucrative deal as well.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I guess the response to clubs is that you can't complain, because you sign up to the TV money. You've got to kind of bend to their will, and the broadcasters are ultimately, I say ultimately, it's us subscribers, I suppose, who ultimately foot the bill for Premier League football. But the broadcasters obviously have buy packages, and we can get into that as to when they land. Buy packages that they need to fit clubs into. So why were Liverpool at 12:30? How do these packages work? What are some of the dynamics when it comes to picking games? Because it's not just simply a case of you get you BT get this game, you Sky get this game. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, and actually, I think because I know you've that's one of the areas that previously you've done, you've got good knowledge of, and have done quite a lot of analysis for a variety of different stakeholders at different times. But from my understanding and working with a number of foreign broadcasters over the years, when purchasing Premier League and Champions League broadcasting rights, it's slightly different, obviously, for foreign broadcasters as it is for domestic broadcasters, in that what the Premier League does for its UK audience is effectively put in place a tender procedure, in part because of previous European Competition Commission diktats around more than one broadcaster broadcasting Premier League games in the UK. But effectively, what has happened over the years is a number of different packages, live exclusive packages, have been sold to a number of different broadcasters: ESPN, Setanta, BT Sport, and Sky. Sky has more or less been the constant, and Amazon obviously, but Sky's been the constant since '92. And whereas there were 5-year exclusive deals back in '92, where only one bidder, Sky, was the success story, over the years that has been whittled down to shorter deals, i.e. a maximum of 3-year exclusive deals, but then packaged in a different way, to the extent now, based on the last tender disclosures, was that effectively there were 3 broadcasters, Sky, BT and Amazon, fighting over 7 packages. Sky, I believe, got the majority, which was 4 packages. BT had 2, and then Amazon got the quite unique, effectively OTT, digital only package, which are coming up quite soon. Actually, the first one's coming up quite soon, I believe. I think it's Boxing Day, isn't it? I think. And I think they've got a few more, actually, bearing in mind COVID restrictions too. So yeah, I think the question back to you to a degree is, once effectively those packages are sold. So, for example, BT has package A, which is 32 live matches available at the 12:30 slot over 32 of the game weeks, and that supposedly translates as 20 second picks, and then 12 I forgot that right, yeah, and 12 fifth round picks effectively are the best games. That replicates across those other packages, like Super Sunday, like Monday Night Football, like the Sunday 2 o'clock game, and then midweek packages as well, for example. So the interesting bit that would be great to get some of your insights on there is, how does that work in practice? How does everyone go around picking matches? It's obviously, I know, a very nuanced and forensic process, but in your experience, how's that actually come around?
Yeah, it's probably more scientific than I think people probably realize. There's a lot of numbers that sit behind that broadcasters collect on viewership figures for different types of matches, and you can run all kinds of models to give you a sense on whether this team is playing this team at this time of the week, and it's this context in the season, this day of the week, this time of the day, this is how many viewers we might expect. And so based on that, broadcasters can kind of make their picks, but they have certain constraints. So you can't pick a team more than, I think, 30 times in the kind of UK broadcast slots. So that means at least about 8 3 p.m. kickoffs for teams over the course of the season. So Liverpool fans might have noticed in kind of February, March time last season, when it looked pretty obvious Liverpool were going to win the league, they started playing at 3 o'clock quite regularly, because all the broadcasters wanted their games at the end of the season when they might secure the title. And that's where you obviously bring in the viewership. So there's kind of all kinds of tactics that fall into that. The really interesting, I guess, point to discuss is this 12:30 kickoff, which actually has more significance than perhaps a lot of people realize. And it's obviously been reported quite a lot in the press here, but I'm speaking as someone from experience, because I actually grew up in Singapore. So out in East Asia, which at the moment is 8 hours ahead of the UK, 8:30 p.m. kickoffs were the one real kickoff you could watch. You could maybe watch the 10 or 11 at night game, into the night, which is quite popular out there. But in East Asia, which is a very big market for the Premier League and increasingly for other leagues as well, that 12:30 kickoff is an opportunity to get in a lot of viewers. And so Liverpool, being a big popular team out in East Asia, and Man United as well, will end up getting picked more in those slots when they can by a BT. Whereas, the Sunday 4 o'clock, which or 4:30 as it is now, which does tend to bring in, I think, some of the biggest viewership numbers. Sky tend to get first picks on that. And that's why you tend to get the kind of Super Sunday, big, like we had, it was Chelsea, Tottenham this week at that time. So there's a lot of kind of maneuvering around it, and a lot of kind of tactics that go into it, and ultimately the clubs, as we said earlier, kind of sign up to that and don't have much wiggle room. Although I guess Klopp's main point is that this season is particularly different.
And I guess, and that's almost the circular argument, isn't it? Because when I was trying to unpick the bones of that conversation, obviously, what the underlying contractual significance is important, because what Kelly was basically saying is, well, don't blame us, BT. We're the ones that are playing by the rules of what the Premier League has set for us. So if you have an issue, i.e. head of one of the elite clubs of the Premier League, it's your CEO's job to go to the Premier League and convince enough of your fellow members as clubs to be able to change that structure. But everybody knows all too well that a change to that structure, i.e. presumably making it less attractive, making the product less attractive, because you wouldn't be able to pick Champions League participating teams for a 12:30 game, would obviously have the reaction of that broadcaster who understood the restrictions placed on it at the time of the tender process and valuing that accordingly, would ask for a rebate at exactly the same time the Premier League not only don't want to be providing that rebate, but I guess the incentive for all of the other clubs, the non-six, for example, would be, I guess, to try and create more competitive imbalance, which would in turn create greater competitive balance, because they would be thinking selfishly, if this disadvantages the bigger clubs, we've got a better shot at beating them and then staying in the league and climbing up those extra places and getting that extra broadcasting money. So again, without putting a spin on it, you can just see the circle of incentives and aligned and misaligned incentives just keeping on spinning.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we get into this season, it is slightly different in that we've obviously got a compressed calendar. So the season started in September, so we're squeezing in what would normally be 10 months of football into 9 months effectively, or potentially a bit less actually. And what we've got this season is, I think you're mentioning down that Gary Neville did a good piece of analysis on previous United, how they, United seasons where they used to play Saturday midweek, and so on. The difference this season is the obviously playing each weekend, but the midweeks are particularly intense because the teams are playing the UCC teams are playing Champions League football. So Liverpool have Atalanta, then Brighton, then Ajax, then another game next weekend, and then possibly even a Champions League game after that, if not in 2 weeks' time. Whereas normally with your kind of Saturday midweeks, your midweek might be broken up with a League Cup match, which most top teams wouldn't really play their strongest teams, or it might be an FA Cup replay later in the season or an FA Cup tie. So generally you can relax and rotate players, but this season the Champions League squeeze has made things harder, and Liverpool, I suppose, in a way lucky that they haven't got 2 away games either side of the Brighton game, because that could easily have happened as well. And Liverpool, the Premier League, Sky, even BT don't have control to the same degree over the Champions League broadcasting. So, there's certain rules around Champions League broadcasting. Liverpool don't play on the same night as Man United to keep the big fan bases separate in terms of viewership. So I don't envy the broadcast. I don't envy the league. Like, it's a really tough proposition, and the one hand, as fans of the clubs that we support, we want our clubs to go and buy players for 40, 50 million pounds and have them improve our teams. And on the other hand, we don't want our clubs disadvantaged by the same group of people who are effectively giving that money. And that's that's the kind of tension as we spoke about at the top of the show.
Yeah, and what we were talking about, I guess it was not sure if it was last week or the week before, and deciding what we were going to talk about then and then talk about now was definitely on WhatsApp when we were preparing, was the nuance actually of the 12:30 debate, because I know Klopp mentioned it in terms of the early start on a Saturday that it effectively means. But usually it's where that context is around what the base game is, what the reaction game is, and what the forward-looking game is a lot of the time. So we were trying to work out what would be the worst case scenario of when a 12:30 would hit a team like Liverpool or another, United or City, the worst. And what we were thinking is if you played on a Wednesday night and had to travel very far back, would then have a 12:30 game away from home somewhere. And then I know it couldn't probably happen. Then you'd have a home game probably afterwards in Champions League as a result. But then potentially a Tuesday home game, that would almost feel the worst best or the worst of everything. But the query then would be, is if then you're playing on the Tuesday following, you're probably at the very earliest then going to play Saturday 12:30, God forbid again. And then again, what I was looking into the tender document a bit was that, Klopp's obviously very unhappy about these 12:30 starts. And there was a really great piece in The Athletic today about why 12:30 is a problem for sleep, recovery, recuperation, eating pasta and chicken at 9 a.m., all those type of things. But, I think ultimately what I found was that, any club can only be at those 12:30 games at the maximum of 6 times this season. So Liverpool I think when I was looking at it was the 19th of December after the Palace 12:30 game that's been picked. For the next effective, 5.5 months, they're only going to be able to have that 12:30 slot a further 3 times. So the query is whether, again, I don't know, maybe it's from more your perspective, would you prefer to get the 12:30 slots out of the way quicker and earlier?
Yeah.
And then go and get into a routine of better for the remaining part of the season, especially because Liverpool's start to the season has actually been quite a tough one. Maybe you can talk about that more than potentially other teams too.
Yeah, I suppose it's all about timing, isn't it? Because if you've got, if you happen to have had a free midweek and then you've got a game on the Wednesday, maybe you want that Saturday 12:30 game because it gives you enough rest and recovery time ahead of it. You're absolutely right that the travel distances. We obviously all enjoy watching a game tonight. In the Champions League, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. But you think about if you were doing exercise until 10 p.m., which I certainly don't, but I know a lot of people do. It takes a while to then drop off after that, and that if you're then expected to kind of get up, train as you would in the morning, suddenly readjust from doing your peak work at 8 p.m. to then 12:30 and just 3 days later. I'm not a sports scientist, but I, as a very amateur sports scientist, I could tell you that that's tricky. So I think there's one of the interesting things that doesn't happen in the Premier League, that does happen in other countries, is clubs are moved essentially, or clubs fixtures are moved to accommodate Champions League games. So probably the most famous recent example was Ajax in the Champions League. They were due to play Spurs. I think it was Spurs in the semi-final.
Yeah.
They were given a week off basically by the Eredivisie to rest players ahead of that game. Obviously, it didn't quite turn out as well as they might have hoped. But the principle of a league almost sacrificing itself to a degree, because when you postpone a game on a weekend, you then have to move it to midweek, and midweek games have fewer viewers. So your broadcast's going to pay less for that because they're going to get fewer people watching it, fewer advertisers wanting to pay for it, and so on. So that's a decision that a league made. I remember at the time there was a great comment in the press conference where Mauricio Pochettino said it was unfair that the Eredivisie could move Ajax's matches. And I think it was Erik ten Hag said, well, it's unfair that Tottenham get 150 million just for playing in the Premier League and we get 20 or 10 or something like that for playing. So I suppose that's, again, talking about trade-offs and tensions, that's another one there for clubs to bear in mind. I very much doubt, that Premier League would kind of accommodate their clubs to the same degree, because a huge amount of their values in the broadcast rights, unlike say the Eredivisie. But it's all part of this one pie that clubs have to kind of give and take on.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is it correct in the Eredivisie that actually part of the club's distribution from Champions League and Europa League is centrally distributed? So there's actually, I guess there might have actually been an incentive, because that difference, if I remember correctly, I think from getting to the Champions League final from a semi-final is the best part of 5 or 6 million euros, I think, probably. So depending on what that distribution would be for the lower teams in terms of share, it might have actually been economically and incentive-wise worth their while to have postponed that match for the chance of getting to the final and then possibly winning it.
Yeah, the clubs agreed to that a few years ago, I think, and when Ajax reached Champions League final, their revenues doubled, which is semi-final. Their revenues doubled from something like 90 million to 180 million. It's just madness. But yeah, it's I guess when you are smaller leagues, you have the ability to adapt that approach, and if it can make your teams go further in the competition, increase the coefficient, you potentially have trickle down effects for the rest of the league.
Couple of questions that have come in, Omar. Shall we? We can go. Obviously, we've got 7 or 8, 9 minutes, so get your questions in if you would like to ask something. Majid has asked about asking about managers from a previous session. Yet more than happy to answer anything that comes up that you have on that, if we can answer it. But Olivier has asked, the broadcasting revenue is one of the main drivers for the increasing financial gap between big and small clubs. How can we distribute the broadcasting revenue without further increasing the gap?
Yeah, well, this is takes us to Project Big Picture, I suppose, from a few weeks ago. As you say, the broadcasting revenue has been the only kind of growth area, or certainly the biggest growth area for clubs over the last 20 years. And that's been different leagues taking different distribution approaches. Premier League, famously quite a egalitarian approach to splitting the money across teams, with in the last couple of years the bigger clubs kind of angling for more revenue, and particularly a bigger slice of that overseas pie. You can understand to a degree their arguments, because what we've been speaking about here around viewership of games, Man United's, Liverpool's, Arsenal's, Spurs, Chelsea, and so on, they are the ones who the fans predominantly turn the TV on to watch. And so that's their argument to kind of get a bigger slice of that pie. The counter argument, obviously, is that competitive balance underpins the reason that those teams are watched. Yes, they're good teams and you want to watch them, but actually the fact that Aston Villa or Burnley or Sheffield United could beat them on any given day is the reason to watch them. So yeah, really, really challenging. They're almost two diametrically opposed views on how you distribute that broadcast money. My view on it is a competitive balance is certainly something that needs to be protected in whatever league. I think some of the kind of small mid-sized European leagues really struggle from lack of competitive balance, and bordering on the being irrelevant. And some of them really, and you look at some of the gaps at the top of the leagues. Just speak about the Eredivisie, which is an example of that. But how kind of you accommodate big clubs to allow that is the big challenge.
Yeah, I was literally just clicking on something because Swiss Ramble actually did a really, really good thread about 5 or 6 months ago that I actually drafted a small piece on, because actually it was very good on some of the insights. I'm not obviously going to recall offhand, but there was just a couple of bits that were actually really interesting in terms of standout statements, which was the first that I saw, and what we talked about was the calculation supposedly is that every Premier League club receives more money from their TV deal than all other European clubs except Barcelona and Real Madrid, which I found quite a big standout. And even better and starker was this one, which was, even though this is almost a year old, I guess, in terms of financial projections and accounts, but the bottom club in the Premier League, Huddersfield, when they got relegated, earned more from their domestic TV deal than Atletico Madrid, Bayern Munich, Dortmund, and Juventus. And even brilliantly, the great one was Real Madrid fell behind Everton and Wolves in the broadcasting revenue league table. Yeah. And there were lots of interesting things about disparities between equitable and unequitable distributions and such. But all of those type of things I just found fascinating in terms of, you know, how well the Premier League has been able to sell its broadcasting deal, to the extent that, you know, even some of Europe's largest clubs aren't receiving the same distributions as mid-table, sorry, Everton fans and Wolves fans, mid-ish table, you know, Premier League clubs.
Yeah, and kind of to bring us back, you know, to the 12:30 kickoffs. This is why La Liga, I think probably about 4 or 5 years ago, started introducing 12:30 kickoffs, because they recognise that, you know, their I guess broadcast money needs to be able to grow so they can have their mid-table teams compete with Premier League mid-table teams. So they're trying to tap into that Asian audience, which, to be honest, I don't know how successfully that's worked, but they've certainly attempted it. They've also rather smartly played Barcelona Real Madrid games at 3 p.m. on Saturdays, quite a number of times over the last few years. Two reasons for that, or I guess one main reason for that, is because that's not a UK TV slot. It's a blackout, which we'll probably run out of time to talk about. But you know, there's no big games on that time. Very few big Premier League teams on that time. So it's an opportunity for, you know, for fans around the world who might normally be Premier League fans to watch a La Liga, certainly a big La Liga game instead. And it's at a good time slot because it's kind of late evening in Asia and kind of morning in Americas, which is a big important market for La Liga. You know, Serie A has experimented a bit with 12:30s. You know, all these leagues are going to have to find where they have these captive audiences and captive markets in order to tap into and to get them watching their leagues.
Yeah, no, I completely agree there. Majid, you've actually touched on a few other points. There's a couple of questions about talent and managers. I think we'll probably leave that for another time, only because I think I want to try and keep the flow of a couple more minutes worth of broadcasting points. And Dan Strickland's actually asked the £10 billion question, which is, do you foresee a situation in the near future where the Premier League adopts a streaming service for all games like NFL do with their games? Would it be worth more money to them?
I don't know if you got a view on that.
I'll do the brief one, which is, yeah, I mean, it's like it's supposed to be like, I think it got labelled as Premflix, didn't it? Of Netflix equivalent of the Premier League going by itself, bypassing broadcasters, developing an OTT offering worldwide and selling a season ticket effectively. Now, there's always, well, I guess always be massive challenges to that, because effectively what the Premier League is doing is outsourcing its and providing a license to be able to broadcasters to be able to broadcast those matches. If they bypass broadcasters and suddenly become the suppliers, the marketeers, the downstream providers of the service, they would be going into a lot of different, highly nuanced global markets to be able to sell their product. Is obviously something that they could do and could possibly do. And interestingly, when the Premier League were interviewing chief executives a while back, if I remember correctly, each of the chief executives, I think it was a Discovery, and then I can't remember who else it was that accepted and then obviously declined. If you recall, they were both OTT broadcasting executives, and that obviously perhaps showed the way of the strategic or tactical approach that the Premier League was maybe looking to try and employ, which was, is this something we can do? Is it actually more of an incremental approach we need to engage on, which is, do we do that in a couple of particular key markets or smaller key markets and see how it actually works? Because again, ultimately, it's like, you know, killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. Do you suddenly, you know, decide not to take the £9 billion global amount that's on the table, obviously for a lot of work the Premier League has to do, or do you have to probably take on quite a lot of VC or private equity money in order to set up what would effectively be a global enterprise to be able to market the Premier League worldwide? But, you know, again, it's a difficult one.
Yeah, I think you summarised it really well there. From everything I've read, the initial approach might be into smaller markets where there isn't necessarily a big telco or whoever buying the Premier League rights in those markets, and an opportunity to test the water. But yeah, it's, you know, what Sky and BT give you is, you know, that comfort of the check, but also they're they've got their own packages and their own strategies that bring people into their packages. So if you're a cricket fan, maybe you will go for the Premier League subscription as well, because that's it's useful to have it all on Sky. So there's things like that which you're talking about consumer behaviour here, which is certainly beyond my pay grade and in a very kind of complex area. But it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
No, it's great. Well, we're at 7:30 as usual. It's gone for me. It's gone pretty quickly anyway. I love having these chats. I hope everybody that's watched it has enjoyed. Feel free to share the content. We'll put it again out on podcast, on YouTube. It's gone out on Omar's Periscope tonight as well. And yeah, any last thoughts, Omar?
No. Look forward to catching up next week.
Perfect. Best of luck for Liverpool tonight, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks.